Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Read and Reread. I am Angelia, and today it is time for Friday Reads on October the 4th. So last week was kind of a blah reading week. This week was much better, I am happy to report, and we will get into it in just a minute. It is a little bit of a gray day. I think it's going to rain some more. The first thing I got to see this morning was a beautiful rainbow that Stephen gets up way earlier, like hours earlier than me, so I miss all kinds of things that happen out in the yard and wildlife, and there's some resident possums that I never see and stuff like that. But this morning he came in, I was already awake, lucky for him, and he was, come out, you got to see the rainbow. And it was a spectacular rainbow with wild green parrots flying all above it. So that was a nice start. And we're going into my birthday weekend. My birthday's tomorrow, so I think it will be a fun weekend. I'm hoping we can go to the art walk tonight. It's the first Friday of every month downtown here in Corpus Christi, but we'll see. If it's a little rainy, that's okay, because it's not cold, and unless it's a big old monsoon, then I'm not that interested. We have kind of a two-part birthday weekend planned. Steve and I will celebrate this weekend, and then next weekend my daughter and her boyfriend are coming for the weekend, and we're just gonna extend it because I'm worth it. All right, so first of all, television. We're still watching all those shows that are dropping once a week and feeling like we are in the old days where you have to wait all week for your show, except my brain is older now. I have to use those recaps, like what happened, because some of these are thrillers and mysteries. Also, I think back in the old days, there weren't that many shows that had an ongoing unfolding story. Was Dallas the first show like that, where the whole season was a plot? I don't really remember. Anyway, what are we watching? Only Murders in the Building, Slow Horses, the Great British Baking Show. Heartstopper started up again yesterday. That's just for me, because I started watching it one week when Stephen was out of town, and so that's like my own little show. We also watched the documentary film Will and Harper. I think it's on Netflix. And that is about Will Ferrell and his friend Harper Steele. They got hired the same week in the 90s on SNL. Will, of course, was a cast member, and Harper was a writer, and she transitioned a couple of years ago. So Will and Harper have been friends for 30 years, but Harper came out more recently as a trans woman. And so she's always enjoyed road trips, but she did lots of solo road trips. But she's kind of nervous about the dangers and the reception that she might receive. And so they go on this road trip, of course, with a film crew, and Will Ferrell, of course, is recognized everywhere he goes and widely beloved. So, I mean, sometimes that does skew or change the reception or experience Harper might have had if she was by herself, but not always. I mean, sometimes it's still painful and awkward, and there's a really regrettable incident in Texas. But they also spend a lot of time, at first I thought, well, is this, how can this really get very deep, because there's a camera crew right there with them and it's edited. But it actually, especially the second half of it, the first half we thought, oh, this is pretty good. The second half gets deeper in their friendships and just Harper's experiences throughout her life, and Will as a friend, forget about that he's a famous person or whatever, just as a longtime friend who really wants to understand and support one of his best friends. And so it was a touching film. So, yep, that's TV. And there's some other shows that are coming back and new seasons coming up. So it's looking good. So it's time to talk about the books. And for some reason, I stacked these all in exactly the reverse order of how I want to talk to them. So now I need to dig. So the first book that I did finish was Pedro, Paramo. And I have talked about that a little bit going into it, but I did finish the book. I kept forgetting to mention that one of the reasons for the timing of reading this was for Hispanic Heritage Month, which runs September 15th through October 15th. So it landed right in the middle of that. So it was that Plus, it is short, so it fit for Shorty September. And it was part of the extended ripple effect of having read Blackouts and reading books that were adjacent to Blackouts or influenced Blackouts by Justin Torres. So this was another book that I read as a buddy read with Michael Clark. And it is the most surreal book I think that I've ever read. And that terminology gets tossed about for any book that's really weird or departs from reality. Sometimes books that are magical realism are called surreal, so depending on the nature of the magical events in the book. But this one truly, if surreal means like a dream, this is the most surreal book that I've ever read. Because, so basically what it's about is a young man named Juan Preciado who, as his mother's dying, she says, what I want you to do is to go back to this town that your father is from and find your father that you've never met, in this town called Kamala. He doesn't think he's like, yes, of course, mother. He doesn't think he's going to, but then he decides he is going to. So he sets off on this road trip on foot to this town, and he's expecting this town that she described, this vibrant village, and these full of all these people, and a lush and wonderful, beautiful place. And instead he finds a burnt out, old, falling down ghost town. Literally a ghost town populated by ghosts. What makes it so surreal is everything is existing simultaneously. Juan meets various people and they tell him stories of the past. And then within their stories, sometimes someone that they're talking about is having memories or thoughts of their past. And there's voices that he is hearing, sometimes indistinctly, but all these things are level and simultaneous. So it shifts around to these different stories and points of view and interior monologues without any kind of narrative or like written shifts, those demarcations. It just all flows. All the different realities and times and memories and thoughts and impressions and feelings all kind of flows together in this kaleidoscope. So it's like when you're dreaming and you're you, but then you're not you, or you're you at a different age, or all of a sudden you're you, but you're a different physical form, or now you're not you, it's somebody else. And it's that kind of feeling, but you're reading it. And there's one, I'm just going to read this one description though that just made me laugh, as a person living in South Texas, which isn't too far from Mexico where this story takes place. And so he's been walking and he's reaching this town, and it's very hot. Up and downhill we went, but always descending. We had left the hot wind behind and were sinking into pure airless heat. The stillness seemed to be waiting for something. It's hot here, I said. You might say, but this is nothing, my companion replied. Try to take it easy. You'll feel it even more when we get to Kamala. That town sits on the coals of the earth at the very mouth of hell. They say when people from there die and go to hell, they come back for a blanket. So that was funny. There's not a lot of humor in this book, but a couple of times something funny did happen. The whole thing was just this deep dream experience, and there is a movie coming out soon, an adaptation. I'm very curious to see how they construct this. The next book that I finished was the book that I'm reading for my band book club at the public library, and it's Bridge to Terabithia by Katherine Paterson. It won the Newbery Prize, which is an annual prize given for writing achievement in children's literature. And this book was published in 1977, so it would have probably, I think, won the 1978 medal. I've read this book a couple of times over the years, but not for quite a while. So the surprise in reading this again. So, well, let me back up. So it's a story about a friendship between two young kids, fifth or sixth graders, Jess and Leslie. Leslie is new to town. It's a rural town in Virginia. And Jess is one of a family with many children. His dad, the money's really tight. His dad loses his job in the course of the book. He has lots of daily chores, milking the cows, helping his mother with various things. There's no extra money. And Leslie comes to town. They had lived in Arlington, Virginia, which is a suburb of Washington, D.C. And they are, her parents, I know her mother's a writer. I can't remember if her father is as well. But the parents are more educated than most adults in this town. They have more money. They're coming to town to simplify and get away from the big city trappings and live a simpler life. And I'm going to read a little passage about that in just a second. But Leslie's really different. She comes to school, she's wearing different clothes, she has different attitudes, but she and Jess find a common wavelength that form this really close friendship. And they each open each other's minds to different experiences and viewpoints, but then they have this common bond, and they have a secret hideaway that's a kind of a mythical land called Terabithia, that by a creek, an old fort kind of thing. And I think that Paterson does a really good job of creating child characters that are at that age, that are right there on the line where they're starting to question things about their world, about the adults in their world, about hypocrisy and views that they've been raised to believe in, but maybe they're not believing in them. That kind of just getting into that middle school kind of time of life. But at the same time, they're children and they can enjoy this pretend world with fantasy dialogue that they have created. And so all of that, and then then a tragic incident occurs. So all of that I enjoyed revisiting. What I didn't like this time around, this was the surprise. There were some things that I really didn't like about the book, and I don't remember any of them from before. And the main one is that every adult character, well, okay, let me say this and then I'm going to put a caveat on it. The adult characters, except for this music teacher that Jess absolutely adores at school, they're all really negative, and they, especially the women, are described without exception. Every woman of every age, all the other girls, his sisters, his mother, his teachers, everyone is described constantly throughout this book as screaming and screeching. Like his whole life is just women screeching at him. And Katherine Paterson, come on, it felt sexist. And even though I get what she was going for, that he was in this world where he's constantly pestered and not understood, but there was no variation in the word choices. It was screaming and screeching over and over again. Near the end of the story, with things that have happened, there are some shifts, and he experiences some of these adults in a slightly different light. And he starts to understand that their lives and their points of view have layers just as his own does. But that just kind of bothered me. I don't know, maybe that just showed some age in the book. But this part at the beginning, when he's trying to understand why Jess is here at all in this town, and here's her explanation. And Jess is not happy. Why Leslie is here in the town. Leslie's not happy about this move. She left a city with a nicer school, a bunch of friends, a bunch of activities that she used to do that she can't do at this, because there's just nothing, there's no extracurriculars offered. And he says, I guess you had a lot of friends there too. Yeah. Why'd you come here? My parents are reassessing their value structure. Huh? They decided they were too hooked on money and success, so they bought that old farm and they're going to farm it and think about what's important. Jess was staring at her with his mouth open. He knew it, and he couldn't help himself. It was the most ridiculous thing he had ever heard. And I thought that was kind of funny, the reassessing of the value structure. And actually that part I think is kind of timeless, because you still see news stories about families that just decide to renovate a bus and go across country with their family and reassess their value structure. So I think people still do that. It is true, and they talk about in this book that Leslie's really the one that pays the price, because she gave up a lot more things. The parents were trying to reach something, and she was giving things away. And so there's that going on in the story, but it seems to bother Jess more than it bothers Leslie. Jess can't believe that somebody would give up all the things that he imagines in the bigger world that he doesn't have. So anyway, I did enjoy it. I'm waiting, for that meeting to find out why was it banned, and I'm guessing it's because of the frank discussions about religion and belief in God in the story, which are not especially provocative, in my opinion. It seems like normal things that a kid would think about, but some people can't tolerate any hint that you would have any critical thought or question about God and religion. So I'm guessing that's what it is, but we shall see. The other book that I did finish was my nonfiction book, The Bookshop by Evan Friss, and I did finish it on this side of the October line, so it does count as my October nonfiction book. If I read another one, that's icing on the cake, but I have fulfilled my personal plan to read a nonfiction book each month this year. And this is a really delightful book for anyone who loves bookstores. It is the history of bookstores in America, beginning with Benjamin Franklin and going up to our current day, with Amazon and the rise of author-owned bookstores like Parnassus Books. And there's a lot of really interesting American history along the way, and how bookstores reflect different trends in American history, how bookstores have always been political catalysts, and they've often been targets of everything from criticism to violence. And so there's just a lot of really interesting things explored in this book. But then also just that I just wanted the whole time to just be able to time travel and visit so many of the places mentioned in this book. So I do recommend this for all of the bookstore lovers. My foot fell asleep. I had to get up and stamp around. I'm back. So what am I currently reading? Well, I'm reading 2 books at the moment, but I think I'm going to finish one of them today. Okay, my foot's still trying to fall back asleep. So if I look like I'm shaking a little bit, I'm jiggling my foot. So with the group read for Victober, this is why I started that sentence out all wrong. It's October. It's Victober. I am participating in the group read on the Victober Discord, and it is this book, The Doctor's Wife by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. I'm following the reading schedule, which is 2 chapters a day. So we're only up to about chapter 7 and 8 today. I'm enjoying the book so far. I hadn't read anything previously by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. This author, Mary Elizabeth Braddon, wrote what were called sensation novels in the 19th century. One of her previous novels, Lady Audley's Secret, is the one that I've heard about, but I had not read this. And something I'm discovering is 2 things that I discovered. One is that the author actually is pretty funny. The descriptions of people and some of the dialogue are actually quite humorous. So that's going to liven up the story. And also, the way it's described on the back so far, I feel a little differently about it. We'll see how it pans out, because it says that it is about the heroine, Isabel Gilbert, trapped in a marriage to a man incapable of understanding her imaginative life. So far, though, what has happened is that the couple hasn't gotten married yet, but the portrayal of the 2 people, to me, the back makes it sound like a young woman gets sucked into a suffocating marriage, and maybe that's how she's going to feel. But the man in question is not. I was thinking of kind of the typical setup where somebody's much older and then the young girl gets married and then she finds out it was a mistake. So far, it's a very young man who basically is falling in love with this girl because she's so beautiful and she looks different from everybody in his town. He's a young doctor. He is kind of dull and not very imaginative, but he's just a kind of a good, decent person as well. And then she is described as she's very young. She's only 17 when she's introduced, and she is so enamored of these sensation novels, wild tales, kind of like Katherine in Northanger Abbey, who's so caught up in the plots of her books that her imagination runs wild. So Isabel's like that. She's fantasizing about being rescued by some exciting person from a novel. There's also another character that's George's friend who writes those kind of novels, but he's only doing it to pay the bills, and he really wants to write his great literary work. So the author is poking fun at this genre that she herself writes in, and authors who work in that genre but really have aspirations to something else. And so all this is going on. So I don't know if it's going to be the thing I was imagining, or more of a kind of a tragic mismatch in a marriage. So we will see as it unfolds. The other book that I am currently reading that I think I will finish today is Tell Me Everything by Elizabeth Strout. And I am also reading this along with Michael Clark because his copy at the library came up right when I was also free to read my copy. So we've been talking about that, and I think kind of taking turns on who was a little bit ahead in the plot, and really enjoying it. I'm going to wait until we have finished to talk about it. It does take place in Maine. If you are familiar at all with Elizabeth Strout's books, Lucy Barton has moved to the same coastal town in Maine. She moved there with her ex-husband William during the pandemic, and it's the town where Olive Kitteridge lives. So characters from Lucy's world and her family, and then Olive's world, are together in the story. And it also has a lot to do with the Burgesses. So if you're familiar with Bob Burgess and his brother Jim, and their families, their spouses, and so all that is together. And even Amy and Isabel are kind of part of the plot because Isabel lives in the nursing home and is Olive's best friend there. So people from the whole Stroutiverse are in this novel. I'm not going to get into the themes and the meanings until I have finished it. That'll be next week. But I'm enjoying it very much, this return. And Olive and Lucy actually meeting and talking is worth the whole price of admission in this book, in my opinion. Okay, so that's it. On Monday, we're going to start reading The Turn of the Screw, Michael and myself. And I'm going to start something else too that I haven't decided on, so you'll have to wait and see. It's a surprise. It'll be a surprise to me because I don't know what it is yet. So that's it. What have you been reading? What have you been watching? What do you think about any of these books? I hope that you have a great weekend, and I will be back on Tuesday. I'm going to do a tag video, finally. I haven't done a tag video in probably a month because I've been busy with the short story project, which I had a lot of fun with, but now it has concluded, and I have this entire treasure box of tags. So I'm going to pick one out and do that on Tuesday, and I will see you then. Bye-bye.